So I've got a confession to make. I'm addicted to that. Incredible, isn't it? That all of us, whether we're studio potters, factory potters, sculptors, whatever, you know, it is the earth. It's the earth, isn't it? And it's really sobering to think that there's more clay made every day by Mother Earth, by planet Earth, than we can ever use. It's being made all the time. And so it is one of the rare things, a replenishable supply. Maybe not some of the primary clays, which Kevin would probably like to stand up and talk about. But no, it's there. And also our dog hairs, which my dog is always in the studio. And yeah, I think I fell in love with it at age 11 at a great, rough, big, progressive, government comprehensive school that had metalwork, woodwork, pottery, cookery, sewing as a huge part of the timetable, equal to other things. And I was really lucky, I think, to have been in school at that time, where I'm still in touch with my pottery teacher, actually, who cashed in his pension and bought lots of my pots. And he sits in Cornwall in a lifeguard's cottage, surrounded by pumpkins and gourds by me. And it's a great honour that he did that. But look, this is the China Clay Mines. It's a painting I bought at auction a while ago. And it really puts it into perspective. It's perspective. It's mind out of the earth. And this is my, well, it was my studio last year, actually. I've just moved studios. But essentially, I've always worked in a really small and intimate space. Excuse me. And although I make big things, a lot of people used to come to this room. There were 2 rooms, and my kitchen was the room, and my bedroom was above the ceiling there. And they'd say, where's your real studio? And I say, this is it. And things were stuffed, as you can see, things on wheels, things were stuffed under the tables. But I make studio pottery. Very proud that I work in many areas of ceramics, and my price ranges from £12 to £1.5 million is one of the projects that I did that took 4 years to do. So really I work in the full spectrum of ceramics, and I just want to really quickly outline what I do, because I'm here to talk about women, not about myself, but it's the context that's very important. And my other studio is at the bottom of that house there in the south of France, where we brought up our daughter, and it's literally in a cave under that house, which was a petrified waterfall. And again, I've always had it's really simple. The kiln's the most complicated thing. I don't have a potter's wheel, or I do now, and I can throw a bit. But essentially I hand build on turntables, and I've come across lots of fabulous women through my career. I was 60 the other day. Yes, I know, you can't believe it. But,
so young.
So young, I know. Yeah, thank you, Kevin. And I've had studios in different places. My husband, Graham, who you might see a picture of soon, and there's Booba, whose hairs you saw earlier, and there he is there. My husband is a builder, and he's always built my studio for me, always in the home that we live in. But also he was the one who said, let's move to Provence and bring our daughter up in French. And I was like, I can't do that, I'm making pottery. He said, you can do it anyway. I know you can. And off we went. And then we moved to Barcelona, and we were living in the Bourne in Barcelona. And now we've just moved to Kent. And for the first time in my life, I've got a studio that's larger than 5 meters square. Really, literally, well, I had 2 that space. But really now I've bought a place near KBJ, who's in Whitstable and works in Margate, my fellow judge from the Throwdown. And I'm so excited to have so much space. The more space you have, the more mess you make, I've realised. I've been really tidy. My studio's health and safety has been a huge thing in my studio, because I live there. I fed my daughter in the kitchen, which was sort of through an open space, probably not quite health inspector proof, but really I've always been really careful about health and safety. And in the studios, I've worked on 4, really, in my 30 years of potting, 1986, so it's 33 years now, since I left the Royal College. I've worked in 4 areas of ceramics. That's studio pottery, and that's what I call fancy pots, which is my heart's delight. It's like embroidery doing this. And this is the rim of a pot, and those are little daisies cut out by party stamps for making wedding cakes. You can all get them, but you can't use them like this. Well, you can, but I challenge you to. because everyone is scratched on the back and applied, and then everyone is filled with a tiny paintbrush on the surface of the basket pot. And I just love doing that. That's what I could do to my heart's content. This is a little blackberry. It's called Naughty Boy Blackberry. And you can see there's a Staffordshire influence just there. There's a character in it that's just, I think it's timeless. And this is a moonlight midnight walk, and these are oak leaves and magma shapes. This is all based on nature and the life force. You can see all my pots on my website and my art dealer's website. And these are pieces that I've made throughout time. And I also work on public art. And having made fancy pots that are really quite expensive and very exclusive and are sold with, I think, England's best decorative art dealer, Adrian Sassoon, that fits one part of my sort of philosophy. But I believe that potters have always served a purpose. We've served a function, really. And originally, of course, it was making domestic ware that we ate off and cooked in and used to hold water and their vessels. And in essence, really, I think, in a lot of cases, not so much now because people are appreciating it more for various reasons, homemade pottery, but IKEA and Sainsbury's and the production, great production plants, and I'm talking to a lot of people who work in that area, really put pottery potters out of action as far as making domestic ware that we used every day is concerned. And so I found that I wanted to serve the community, because I very much believe in all sorts of communities, I'm very strong on community, by working in the public art sector. So I like making big things, and it made sense to make large-scale pieces for hospitals, for schools. This was for a school, for libraries, for parks, and with architects. And really that's been the sort of other half of what I do. This is a storytelling wall, and you can see hidden here there's a fish, and there's a sausage probably, and there's a train, and there's a hand up there and a teacup. And hidden in there, I worked with the local community in Brighton, and for 2 years we made 64,000 paintings. And every child in the school made a piece, every person from the Deaf Association made a piece, every child from the nursery made a piece, and this is another storytelling wall. Again, it's about community, it's about telling stories. So there's storytellers here. This is called Wall of 1,000 Stories. 3 things, tell a story, improvised storytelling. So really these are the sort of public art areas. So I work on fancy pots, on public art, and on glaze technology. My passion is that mystery of mixing a glaze from a recipe, first of all read by Emmanuel Cooper or Derek Clarkson's fantastic article in Ceramic Review about crystalline glazes. And I've got an archive of glazes where I grow crystals. I don't know if any of you have seen this type of glaze before, but you simulate volcanic activity in the kiln and grow crystals in the matrix of the cooling of the glaze. And each crystal is seeded and there's a centre. But I think I probably have the largest crystalline glaze archive in the country, Kev?
Yeah,
probably. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, bigger than mine.
It's about 3,000 and growing. So and this whole palette, which is in my tiny studio in London, which hides behind a sort of roller blind, if you like, a lot of the time, because it's quite dominating in a small room. But this is a palette that I can have interior designers, architects, come and choose and look, and I can work with them. But also for my own ceramics, I've got a huge palette to work with. So it's a bit like a painter having a huge palette. And it's just grown and grown and grown. And by working with architects, I've been forced into presenting it well. And of course, if you present something well, it builds itself, and it's a lovely thing. All of you amongst you who make pots or who do testing, I sort of say, don't keep it in old boxes. Look at it and display it beautifully, and it'll be a better resource for you to use. And this is the 4th area that I work in. And there's Elaine, who's here today, who's at Clay College. And this was the Great Pottery Throwdown. What an experience it was to be, to be thrown in at the deep end with Kevin really the backbone technically of the whole thing, and all of us pulling along, and everybody was fantastic. The energy from making a series like that and seeing people going through the challenges and it drawing the best out of them, more than they could ever have imagined, it was just such an honour, if not very tiring. It was really hard work, but we did have a lovely time. And we hope, don't hold your breath, but it might might come back. You never know. Let's hope. All of you write. If you write a letter to the BBC asking a question, they're obliged to reply to you. That's all I'm saying. And this is I don't work alone in these small domestic studios. I have a team, and they all make their own work. And as you can see, there's Sakib, who's here today filming me, and he does all my social media and helps me. He helped me put this lecture together today while I was potting. It's a workshop manager, and all the others, they work 2 or 3 days a week, sometimes 5 days a week if they haven't got any money, sometimes no days a week if they're really busy. But there's a team of 9 who come in and out to either studio, wherever I am. Some of them fly down to Provence and have holidays, and others come out to Kent and stay with me in Kent. But basically, they're based in London, and they all make their own work. But here we are working together. So all of you who are out there today who've really felt the beauty and the joy of working together to make something together in a line. And that moment where you're all working, you're all concentrating, you're all doing something. It's just so rejuvenating and so inspiring. And here we are, 4 of us. We work for 2 days glazing this one pot with about 40 different coloured blues. And as you can see, we do have a laugh. They're all smiling. I didn't tell them to smile. And that's my big kiln. This is how close quarters we were. And these are some of my girls. And we went out to India recently. We were asked to the first ever ceramic triennale in India. And they asked me to go out and show how I worked. And I said, really, we have to, I have to bring some of my team, really my girls, out. And we rebuilt the studio. You can see lots of films on my Instagram and things like that about the whole journey. They'd never been to India before. And off we went, and it was fantastic. India is on the verge of this fantastic enthusiasm for studio pottery, actually, and for making things. It's very exciting. And these are the things that my team make when they're not making for me. They have their own studios, and they try to sell their own work. As we all know, it's harder to sell something than it is to make it. Almost as much fun most of the time, but that's their work. And those are 2 of the men that work for me. I just thought I'd better not mention them. But this is really, it struck me today, Kevin. I did my BA at Bristol, and I had Mo Jupp, Wally Keeler, George Rayner, Nick Hamoki, these great studio potters teaching me. And the first time, Jill Crowley came as a visiting lecturer. And I thought, oh my God, there's a woman who teaches. Because I really hadn't experienced that in the early 80s in Bristol. It was a male-dominated world, which actually the coming of Jill and then Alison Britton and Janice Chelenko and Carol McNichol, all the people you mentioned, this was the sort of dawning of that time, I suppose, the very early 80s. And this is Jill Crowley's reduced, they were big sculptures, and the iron, you can see the speckles, she put iron in the body and it came out. And this is Janice Chelenko, who everybody gave a cheer to. Sadly, she passed away last year. And this is her studio. And she was really, to me, she was the maverick of those women that I knew, who often made things, and they might make the same series of work quite often. But Janice was the one who tried different things. She worked with Roger Law of Spitting Image on the 7 Deadly Sins and modelling those up. She worked with Richard Deacon, who's a great sort of performance art installation sculptor, photographer. But she worked with him on things. And what was the other thing that you said earlier today? You said she did something else. I can't remember. Dart, wasn't it? And this is into industry. She really turned dart around. And she designed for Next as well with other people, with paintresses painting. Generally women, I know, she told me about it. But she was the one who sort of threw away the brown pot idea and started doing wild, beautiful, flowing painting and using the movement of the glaze, much like Wieldenware did, in the past. And so, again, it's full circle. I'm not the first person to run glazes all over my pots, and neither was she, and it's a timeless thing. And those are her pieces. She was a bit of a sort of punk potteress in a way. And really a great inspiration to me, because she, much like I work with architects now and schools, and I'll do, anything really related to clay, anything. There she is working with Spitting Image on the 7 Deadly Sins. She was a great inspiration. And this, I suspect it's kind of not that typical. It's Clarice Cliff, 1926, Celtic Harvest, when I first noticed my husband in 1983, he had this pot, and I didn't know who Clarice Cliff was. I was just a Bristol girl. And I just thought it was joyous and beautiful. And I learned more and more. I loved her work and learned more and more about her. But I wanted, you know the story that she was a paintress and she sort of stayed after work sometimes and drew on the desk and was flirting with Coley Shorter in the end. You know, he was her partner when his wife died. But I wanted to ask how many of you who might have been paintresses at the time or makers, how many of you would like to have done something of your own? How many of you had ideas that you wished you could just use all the facilities there to do something new? Did any of you?
I did at one point. I asked my manager.
Yeah.
I wanted to make some tiles.
Yeah.
You know, in the 60s it was a big thing, like everybody was making their own tiles. And we did actually, you know, like make a mould for a tile, and we used all the facilities. None of the bosses knew. Just him.
Oh, I see. Okay.
But you know, we produced a few.
Yeah.
They were dark green and brown. You know, that sort of
very 60s.
Yeah. 60s.
But it's just that she, you know, she was originally a paintress. Correct me if I'm wrong. And you know, it was her flair was discovered by management, and she just flew with it. And she took her painting ladies down, and they painted in the windows of Heels or Selfridges with their berets on and their smocks and things. And you know, she really was a rebel and a modern and just sort of fantastic, innovative woman of her time. In 1926, after the war, or between the wars, trying to cheer people up. And so she did cheer people up. There she is. She looks great, doesn't she? And then the Susie Cooper, who I just think was brilliant. Is this Sue Cooper that you're talking about? It's another person. I was mixed up.
Excuse me, Susan Cooper lived in our village of Milton.
Did she?
She's got a garden there with a picture in it tells you all about
Her? Where is that?
Milton.
Milton.
Which is just outside the city. Well, it's still in the city, but
Huh.
very far away.
So stylish and so restrained, and yet so full of love and care. Really beautiful design, Susie Cooper, I think. She was sort of different to Clarice Cliff. I don't know if you could put a class difference or something, but there was a different, restrained design. And she retired on the Isle of Wight, and I was trying to find pictures, and she made these giant collages by sticking seeds down to make landscapes that were like embroidery. And I'm trying to find pictures of them to show you, but I couldn't find them. I saw it on a TV programme. And there she is. And here we come to the women, we don't know their names. And Kevin's been saying they've always been there. You know, and what we have, I was asking an auctioneer yesterday, we've got the Barlow sisters from Minton in 1880s. And really, they're the sort of first named makers that we might know about. And as Kevin mentioned, the wheel came along. But you know, all the ceramics that we see throughout time, throughout history, right back to 20,000 years ago, the first plate has been found. Now they've found a plate in China that's just a very simple plate with corn husk mixed in with the clay to help it tolerate heat. You know, did women make them or did men? You know, women haven't just started making pottery, you know, but they were nameless. And there's nothing wrong with that, because I actually think we kind of got the better deal, maybe, because it's such fun and it's so brilliant decorating and making pottery at that level, and having often used, you know, you were saying, Kevin, about the men having the machines and they were dealing with that kind of job. You know, it's kind of fabulous that we were able to just enjoy that, and the camaraderie from the film that we saw that's being made, and the joy from the pleasure from work, and the way communities formed and friendships formed. That's the luxury part, that's the cream on the milk, really, if you like. And so there they all are, the brilliant ladies who had enjoyed it. And I was in South Africa recently, so this is sort of really put the background of what I do. And over 30 years of potting, I've come across these fantastic women. And this is the lady who runs Ardmore, which is in South Africa. And she was a fine artist, trained as a fine artist. And she saw one of her servant ladies, I hate to say it, servant ladies, I think it was this one. She saw how talented she was, and they started making pots together. And this factory has grown to a sort of world-class production line where she takes people who wouldn't even have done, much like the ladies said in Stoke-on-Trent, they'd arrive at the factory and whatever job was available, they'd sit down and start doing it. These people come from the village, from the townships, never having painted before or modelled, and she asks them to have a go, and they have a go, and after a few weeks, if they're not very good, they kind of disappear. You know, they go wander away. And if they're good, they just thrive and blossom, absolutely blossom. And in fact, these are the ladies where I don't know if this is one of my photographs or not, but I went and visited the factory last year, and this is one of the ladies who actually died. HIV has been destroying, decimating the population in South Africa. And a lot of her workers actually died of HIV, and she sort of nursed them through it and saw them through it. And this is one of them. She set up a museum to it. But look at this talent that they didn't even know that they had. And she's running this fantastic community out in South Africa. Really joyous to see. And of course, here's Dame Lucy Ree. I had the pleasure of meeting her. And she gave me, I went for tea and I took a tiny sandwich off the plate. She said, "You're a big girl, take 3. I was like, okay, what does that mean? But no, and she had to make buttons to earn a living early on. You know, she came over as a refugee, actually, very welcome refugee, I have to say. And there she is in her little tiny intimate studio below her home in a mews near Hyde Park. But what a fantastic woman. You know, just really joyous, but this level of intelligence, with she and Hans Kober had this level of intelligence that really blew studio pottery onto a sort of sculptural market. And when you say lots of money, there are £100,000 for a good coloured bowl at Sotheby's or Christie's. And here's one. And they were just this incredible intelligence that she brought over. And Janet Leach, who I think, she was an American potter. I don't know her maiden name. And everybody knows her as Bernard Leach's wife, but actually I've been hearing stories about the fact that the Leach pottery wouldn't have existed without this lady and her driving force behind Bernard Leach. And she made the most fantastic pots that were just like her, look, can you see? And I think people are like their pots. There she is. There's a corporal nature, isn't there, to a pot? A body, a foot, a shoulder, a lip. And they stand and they have poise, and I just think they're just like, I'd love to have known Janet. And Magdalene Odundo, who Kevin mentioned earlier, with her roots and African heritage. She's got a show on at the Whitworth at the moment that's just opened, that's supposed, I haven't been up yet to see it. And I just think her work is stunning, and she coils big pots, and she coils in 2 days, taking the clay to its limits, which is very interesting. There she is. I think that's her retrospective that's on at the moment. And Felicity Aliff. These are ladies who I know and who inspire me in there. And Felicity works out in China. She's married to Takeshi Yashida, who's also a studio potter. She was head of Royal College of Art, acting head for the last 4 or 5 years, and professor there. And she makes these fabulous pots with the help of men, I have to say. Throwing at the wheel, 4 men throwing with 1 piece of clay at the same time, and these are taller than me. You know, they stand literally this high, and she makes them. And she has a studio in China, a studio in Bath, and she moves between the 2. And this is Ingrid Murphy, who's the most amazing. There she is holding her slip cast version of one of the Staffordshire flatbacks. But just here, you can see there's a little barcode thing that you use when you go to the supermarket to click your food in and out. And you can get your phone and you can click on the barcode, and it'll tell you the love story between these 2, and it'll tell you the history of the pot. And she really uses technology to a really lovely, humorous, really future-thinking but very simple way. For instance, this is a hand that I think was in India when I went to the Ceramic Biennale. And she was there for a week or 2 at the Biennale, and then she had to go back to work. She teaches at Cardiff, and her dad lives in Ireland. And she had a little thing that she could take around wherever she was sitting at her desk. If somebody came up and put their hand against that, the light would bleep wherever she was in the world. It was connected through the internet, you know. And she's done all these things where she made a map of a city out of clay, and she walked around the city recording the different noises. So you could sort of touch different parts, because luster it has electrical conductivity. You could touch different parts and it would play the noises of the different places in the city. Really fantastic. She goes out to Nassau and talks to scientists about how you can use technology in a human. And she has a pet. What was it? She made the pants. Yeah, the pants. What were they? But yeah, you had to wear these pants if you'd had a hip replacement or something, and the pants would tell the doctors whether you were walking or standing correctly to get better. And she's just brilliant. Ingrid Murphy. Lisa Hammond, of course. How could I not mention the great Lisa Hammond, who also looks like her pots, I think. And she and Kevin are behind the Clay College. They're the people I helped with the fundraising at one stage, and I just think you're brilliant for what you're doing. It's a technical college more, isn't it, really? And I went to technical college, so I like to think of it as that. Obviously, it ends up now the students are going into their final flourish. And but Lisa is an amazing soda-firing potter. And of course, Clover, look at Clover. Clover Lee on the Series 2, who really wasn't very good. And she'd never really hand-built, ever. And on this challenge, it was the Russian doll challenge. And it was the Russian doll challenge, and she was struggling and things were falling to bits halfway through the 3 hours that they had, or however short a time they were given. She had nothing. And she was like, I've never done this before, I've never. And she'd be in her little Wellington boots getting up and down the ladder to get onto her client. I don't know, she was just an amazing tower of force. And all of a sudden, she realised what hand building was. It was the most, in front of the cameras, this most amazing moment. And she's still making these, actually, if you go on her Instagram. Did you? What a fantastic. And so that was really what the TV did. It sort of brought miracles out of people. And this was so beautiful.
And that's the only project I didn't write.
Oh, is it? Sorry about that, Kevin.
It was the idea of the series producer's 8-year-old daughter.
No.
And
Another woman.
He came and he said, could we do this? I said, there's no history of Russian dolls in ceramic. Yeah, well, it's my little girl's idea. Can we make it work? And I said, oh, God, yes.
But she exemplified the reason that, I'm very interested in education. I'm a product of a big rough comprehensive school having a pottery department. So I'm really keen on letting everybody see the pleasures of clay. And so I work with the government to try and build policy to stop them taking kilns out of schools, decommissioning things. And then the BBC Pottery Throwdown came along and it was like straight into 3.5 million people's living rooms. And it has just been brilliant, hasn't it? But to me, she was the shining example of this discovery through doing. And I'm very much an advocate of doing. There's nothing worse than sitting down and think that you can't do something or how difficult it's going to be. I believe you have to start. And the Throwdown made them do that, actually. It's very interesting. And this is Hitomi Hisono, who's a studio potter who makes the most extraordinary. She's from a farming family in Japan. No ceramic history in her blood or in her sort of dynasty of farmers. And she sort of found her way to the Royal College of Art one way or another. And this is her project with Wedgwood. She went into Wedgwood and worked with the people there, looking at the way sprigging was worked and then designing herself with them. And this is her studio pottery work, and this is a piece that's in the British Museum. It's a very big thing. Obviously you can hold it by that, but then they flourish. And this is Pippin Drysdale, great women that I have the benefit of. She's an Australian and makes the most extraordinary pots that are tens of thousands of pounds in their garnitures. And her colourways, she works in Australia, you can see the heat of Australia there. Does she look like her pots? Maybe, I don't know. The lines of her hair or something, I don't know. And this is upside down on purpose. You can see, yeah, she's making them in Australia, so they're always upside down in Australia. But it's upside down on purpose because I can't not mention the important women in my life who aren't necessarily potters. Although Zandra Rhodes, Dame Zandra Rhodes, collects a lot of pottery. I don't know if you can see any of mine behind her, but normally there's a lot of mine behind her. And I feel, and it's very interesting for the pattern makers amongst you, I think a pattern relates to a pot in the same way as a garment relates to the body. My mum used to wear fishnet tights, and I used to love the way the diamonds got bigger at her knee and her calves. And, you know, that's a sort of literal example of it. But Zandra actually makes a dress relate to the body and the way the body uses a dress. With this butterfly dress, it might be a butterfly one, when the arms are spread, the pattern reveals itself as a giant, it's a printed giant circle. And I feel Zandra, who loves pots and collects, and a lot of fashion designers, Vivienne Westwood collects pots, Issey Miyake collects pots, Dior love pots, and Zandra absolutely adores pots because there's a very strong parallel. They're dressing bodies, much like we, whether we're factory makers or studio potters, we're dressing the body of a pot. And she's a dear friend and a great inspiration. And Jean Muir, the same thing. She made these incredible clothes, and I knew her, and she'd made dresses for me and clothes for me when I first finished at the Royal College of Art. She's dead now, sadly. But she loved pots and was a great ambassador for potters. And really the volume and the cut of her things were very like pots. And this is a portrait of my husband and I that I made. Which one do you think I am? These are big pieces. They weigh about 1/3 of a ton each. They're great big things. And they're actually in the Mint Museum at Carolina. It's a lovely museum which is very family involved. And they wanted to buy this, they saw it for sale. And they said they had some more budget. And I said, well, I'll make you a husband for her in crystalline glazes. And this is called Mr. and Mrs. Tutti Frutti. And they don't like to be separated. And there we are there. Mr. and Mrs. Tutti Frutti. He is not an axe murderer. This is my dear husband who built the houses and the studios that we live in himself. He's like grand designs, but he won't let the cameras on him. But he builds the houses and I make the pots. And really, I wouldn't have done any of, especially, well, all of it really, without having been with my husband for 35 years. And this is really Nina Campbell. So here we go. I made this pot, or I had this pot decorated to match her fabrics. And she's collected my work and gives me clients all over the, really places my work in beautiful houses that she designs. But essentially, I was just looking at, as a treat really for her, I made a series that was based on the latest colours. And these interior designers have a huge effect, obviously, as they will have done throughout time and the placing of pots that we make. And this is another interior designer, Suzanne Lovell, and this is a piece placed in these grand, elegant houses. And this is another woman who's affected me, not a maker of pots, but really the great Dame Rosalind Saville, who was director of the Wallace collection in London with the biggest collection of Sèvres in the world, actually. And she's written lots of books about it, and she's talked on TV. You might have seen her on television talking about it. But it's she who's inspired, really, the great study, and I study a lot of historical pots. And she's opened a lot of windows to me on knowledge. And these are some of the Sèvres pots, so that's not a very good picture. I think a pot should be huggable or strokeable, and I find Sèvres is a very strange thing. That's S-E-V-R-E-S, 17th century French porcelain, because it's not huggable, and it was made for kings and queens who also aren't huggable. And to me, it's pots that are made that are huggable for the table or to use. I think all my pots suggest use, but they're not often used. And it's one of my dream fantasies to work with a factory, really, and to design with a factory. And these are different women. This is Junko Mori, who's really the best creative blacksmith in the country. A woman who works with blacksmithery in North Wales. And this is me working in a man's world. So I mentioned to you about the budget of £1.5 million. I nearly died. My husband nearly left me. And it was the most traumatic project I could ever have thought of doing. And this is Rich Miller, the technician from the throwdown. Before we did the throwdown, this is the demolishing of the building that we then rebuilt. And here we are on the 7th floor with the men who are hanging the 11,000 tiles that I worked on with Rich Miller. And this is the glaze researching. And really this is sort of talking about the fact that Kevin said it is a sort of woman's world, actually, studio pottery. But you step into when there's machines and it becomes a man's world. And it was very, very fascinating. Helen and I, we used to go to these huge offices overlooking the Thames. It was like James Bond offices with all these architects looking at us. And we were saying, yeah, we can do 11,000 tiles for this great facade. And the main question that they had was, what happens if you die halfway through the project? Very practical question. And we had to put, and I said, I'm not giving you my glaze recipes. Oh, no. And I kept my glaze recipes in triple sealed envelopes, wax sealed with their solicitors in case Helen and I did die together. But we produced these tiles in a man's world, mechanically hung tiles, 11 tons hung on the front of a building in Mayfair in London. And here we are in the man's world again, behind us. Helen and I had to check, or Helen did lots more than I did, check every tile for first, second or third, and the integrity and the colourways, and every crate had to be moved around by a forklift truck with a man driving it probably. But really it was an amazing experience to work in that world, which is dominated, actually architecture is dominated by men. So I'd worked in it with EPR, the architectural practice. There were 110 architects, and I think, yeah, about 10% women. I'm not sure. But I worked with great architects. And this is the plan to hang the tiles on the left, because there were 3 different types of white tile. And this is the building. You can all see it on Savile Row. And this sort of brings me back to my inspiration. And I think whether you're designing factory ware, sculpture like Barbara Hepworth, who also did a lot of clay, or this is Axel Salto. My inspiration personally is nature, as you could see by the blackberry, and as you might see if you see my website, it really is majority of nature. Pumpkins, pineapples, gourds, blackberries, celery, I'm doing celery, rhubarb is my latest thing. But really this is Axel Salto, who I feel the spirit of what he did, and he was a great Scandinavian potter who worked with Royal Copenhagen. He was a fine artist, and he'd do drawings and he'd model, and he'd work with the studios at Copenhagen. And it was the glaze studio at Royal Copenhagen who glazed the work with feldspathic glazes. But I feel he was like a man interpreting nature. And I think this is a very male gourd, or red pepper, or whatever it is. And I feel like the spirit of Axel Salto, who's really my pottery hero, not a man, not a woman. And this is what I'm inspired by, which is nature. And I like to think that it's Mother Nature that inspires me in this world, because nature's so miraculous, isn't it? As is ceramics. You get this clay from the ground, this muddy puddle, and can create things from Wedgwood, from Clariscliffe, from everybody, to these shiny things. And it's the alchemy of that which drives me. And I know it's driven women or men throughout time. This transformation, it's physics. Clay becomes ceramics, an irreversible thing. And this is the last but one slide, and this is the Venus of Willendorf, 5000 BC, is it, Siki? We were looking it up. They don't quite know what it's made of, actually, I don't think. But and it's 11 centimetres long. Did a woman make it, or did a man make it? That's my question. And who's been making since? You know, we didn't start making pottery when the Barlow sisters were named, and it's so these nameless people, but does it matter? It's the pots that matter, and the pots that last longer than we do. And so all of you makers here, it's a big responsibility actually, because the only way of getting rid of a pot, you can smash it into pieces, but to dissolve it is impossible. It'll hold the strongest acids known on the planet and the strongest substances. And the only way you can get rid of it is to grind it down, which is really from rock to sand. It's the only way you can get rid of it. And so there it is, evidence of 5,000 years ago, an extraordinary thing. And that's the last image, because that's the little heart ring holder that I've put as the raffle, one of the raffle prizes. And it's to inspire you to go and buy raffle tickets, because this is such a great thing. And really, I'd just like to say, it's such an honour to be here representing women in studio pottery, because there are so many great ones. And thank you so much for having me, and it's just such a wonderful, wonderful evening. I'm really thrilled to be here. Thanks so much.